college football fan. I'm your host, Travis May, and you can find me on X at FF_Travis M. You can find my co-host, Stefan Lako, at Stefan Lako, Lako, on X. And on Total College Football, we cover the sport from top to bottom, from win totals to key matchups, from freshmen to NFL draft conversations, all that. It's right here on Total College Football. And we're actually going to dive into, I know we're fresh off of week one. A lot of takeaways have been said, recaps have been covered, but we do want to talk about some key teams, key players who are standing out that really dive in more so like moving forward, what it means than, hey, what just happened? Because you know what just happened. You watched the games, you heard some other people on other shows, talk about this thing. We want to look ahead and future impacts for what happened just throughout the rest of the season, because a lot of times the foundational happenings from week one actually are very, very telling for the rest of the season. So we'll be diving into some takeaways, diving into some big matchups like Texas versus Michigan, a little bit of a surprise segment. I don't even know what we're going to get into. Stefan's going to surprise me. And then jump into some Kansas State action because that's going to be a particularly interesting wild card team, especially given how things are going so far. And then some NFL draft prospects like we like to do. But Stefan, doing all right, man?
Yes, I'm doing great. Recovering from illness, recovering from a hip injury. I feel like an 87-year-old man. I was like, I'm going to need hip replacement surgery. This is perfect. But no, got to sit and rest and watch lots of college football. So I think just beautiful. Some really surprising outcomes, some not so surprising ones, some week one takeaways, if you will. And I'm excited to get into it because you and I text back and forth on Saturdays quite a bit, but we haven't talked in the last 2 days. So I'm curious kind of where you've landed on some of these things, because it's easy to get carried away in the moment, for me at least. And so now having a little bit more time to digest, sit down on a Tuesday night and talk through some of this stuff will be good.
Yeah, I think so. Because it's really hard to digest the entirety of this sport on the same day that it's happening. But the good news is we can actually take a breather here and dive into it right now together. So let's do it. Let's talk about some of the big games and some of the big takeaways. I kind of know maybe where you might want to start, but you tell us where we're going to go kick things off.
Yeah, let's start in the swamp with that week one blasting of Florida 41-17 when the dude from Incarnate Word comes after the game and is like, that wasn't very noisy at all. I mean, that's telling to me right there. But let's get into this moving forward. Like you said, one of the things I want to talk to you about is, can anyone actually stop Miami in the ACC? I happened to check the lines right before we hit record. Miami plus 180 to win the whole thing. Next is plus 300 is Clemson, and then I think Louisville is next. FSU now with 2 ACC losses is down to 9th at plus 4,000. Virginia Tech lost to Vandy. So that's kind of where I wanted to start and asking you, is there anyone that can actually stop Miami in the ACC? To me, the only way the ACC, I know this is overreaction Tuesday, but the only way the ACC gets 2 teams in the playoff is if Miami keeps winning and then somehow loses in the conference championship game. And then that winner would go in, and then Miami might be like ranked high enough. But to me, this is looking like a one conference team. I asked you a lot of questions.
No, I think you nailed it, though, because it would be so Miami to just have a killer season and then just lose in the championship anyway. Oh, man. And then depending on what they did, if they did screw up one more time, that second loss, whether it should or not, might be enough to keep them out. And that would just be so Miami, given like the last 2 decades of how things have gone. Because, early 2000s, it was way different. They were churning out top-tier NFL talent, and they just have not done so. It's funny, like if you look at, like who's the quarterback you, tight end you, running back you, wide receiver you, they're really far up there in terms of like NFL production, like all time, because they still have, that early 2000s, even beginning of the 2010s with some of the guys still producing in the NFL, but not so much recently. So It's interesting just to see how they actually have a lot of talent this year. And I know we were a little bit critical of Cam Ward just having at least a true proven profile. But he's well on his way to that after this just thrashing of Florida. And so to me, the answer to Cam Ward, is he real? that question, for many, I have kind of assumed he was. I think he's definitely moving in that direction. I don't think he's a first-round quarterback yet, especially after you're playing Florida team that might actually go 1-11. When it's all said and done, we'll see. But I think that there's still questions, but they definitely should be the favorite now, given what we saw out of Florida State again, not just once but twice already, and out of Clemson versus Georgia, but they have, as we kind of talked about last week, the pressure got to Cade Klubnik, and that was problematic throughout the whole game. And if Miami can do that, if and when they do play, multiple times or whatever it is down the stretch here, I don't think that that's going to be a problem for Miami either, given their set of pass rushers getting some pressure when it matters. So, like Tyler Barron was solid off the bat. Francisco Maligoa, I believe he had a sack as well. They've just got a lot of talent on defense. So it's hard to argue that they're going to be the team to beat or not. It just looks like that is the case. And Clemson's probably just going to struggle anytime they play any decent team.
Yeah, and we'll get to Clemson in a second here. You kind of started talking about who are the players we need to know. And it's always funny because when you talk to me, it's like I'm going to name the players that get me points in DFS. So Restrepo, George, Arroyo. But you've already mentioned some other players. What are some of the guys that names that we really need to have highlighted and circled that we need to be watching on this team because Miami is going to be, it looks like, again, we are probably getting way ahead of ourselves, but just given how the rest of the landscape looks, I imagine they're going to be, in some pretty big games whenever they're playing anyone interesting. Like it's going to be a big deal because they're going to have the best record in the ACC on the line, most likely. The mute guy got you. The mute monster.
Like Arroyo is finally healthy, and so that's pretty promising. That tight end, he's actually going to be productive. It looks like Xavier Restrepo looked every bit the part, an absolutely absurd grab, and he had 6 more to go with it. I think his long was like 40 plus yards on the day, so he looked more explosive than I remember. So he always projected to be kind of to me like a really good ball skills chain mover. But not maybe necessarily a downfield threat. And it seems to me he's just kind of a little bit, he took his game to another level this year. So I don't know who is going to be the kind of go-to guy alongside him, because they do also have Jacoby George. They have Sam Brown. They've got Isaiah Horton, who's actually from not too far from here. He's actually from about 20 minutes from where I'm sitting currently. It's kind of cool to see him kind of break out as a sophomore, I believe, this year, or maybe third year at this point. I lose track of years in recruiting, but they're really deep. And then when you go outside of those two, you still have, even beyond them, the true freshmen in Nikar and JoJo Trader. So like they are stacked at the skill positions, and that's not even talking about the running back in Damian Martinez, who is really good as well. He didn't go off like he did at times for Oregon State necessarily, but 15 carries for almost 70 yards, that's not bad at all. So I want to see him kind of do a little bit more damage, because Cam Ward, as much as he is athletic, he's not necessarily going to make you pay with his legs like some college quarterbacks do. So they have amassed talent. They've been building towards this year, and they finally look like they have enough pieces on both sides of the ball to do it.
Yeah, and Cam Ward had that one moment with that interception. I was like, what the hell are you doing? But yeah, he kept it pretty clean outside of that, which I think is really important for him. Can we talk about another team, another takeaway that I have from week 1? And it's that Clemson is no longer an elite program. And quietly, they've been working this way for the last 3 years. Ever since Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence have left, they have not been the same team. And I don't think that that's solely because of the transfer portal, especially 3 years ago. Excuse me. When things looked so different. Clemson is 1-2 versus top 25 teams since Trevor Lawrence has been gone, with an average score of 16 to 21.3. So like very low scoring. Clemson offensively against good defenses is not good. I think they average like 2 point something yards a play over the weekend. Absolutely. And I know Georgia's really good. And to me, this is not a story about Clemson just got their butt kicked by Georgia. Yeah, we know that. We were on that. This is more that Clemson hasn't been elite in quite a long time since Trevor Lawrence went to the NFL. In that time, Clemson has had just 3 offensive players drafted and none of them higher than the 4th round. So it's been a bad stretch for Clemson. Dabo Swinney, I think the game has passed him by. I think he can reinvent himself. He can maybe try something different, but not just from the transfer portal perspective. There was a point in the game, I texted you when Clemson punted the ball. They were around midfield. They were down 17 in the 3rd quarter, and they punted the ball. At that point, they chose to lose the game. They chose that they did not care about a W. The only thing they cared about, and you put it out well, they just don't want to get their butt crushed on national television. But guess what? It happened anyway. So the one thing that you tried to avoid by playing it safe, you ended up doing anyway, while costing your team a shot to win. This is on Dabo. Yeah, he said it was like that he needs to wear this L. Like, yeah, absolutely. You are the reason why this team is where it's at. And I don't see him changing because he seems like a real stubborn guy. So to me, this is a problem for Clemson.
It's really hard to argue that he still does a really good job on high school recruiting. Like, it was really evident that their defensive front was still really freaking good. Like, Peter Woods is really good, TJ Parker's really good, Cape Art and more. Like, they've got some bodies, some dudes up front. But they did have questions with their secondary when it kind of mattered most. When it came to stopping just even a true freshman running back in Nate Frazier, who actually looked really special, and I got to write him up a little bit this past week. He had a lot going for him this past week, and it's, I mean, having over 100 yards from scrimmage as a true freshman against Clemson, that's no slouch. That's a crazy performance. But that, I wonder how much that has to say about where Clemson is today. As much as they do have pedigree and we want to believe in the development and what we've seen Clemson do in prior years, they're not it this year until something changes. And I mean, if you look at their offense last year, even against pretty much everybody that they played, it was pretty awful offense. I mean, they had 20 passing touchdowns on the year, and 9 of those came in 2 games. One came against Charleston Southern, I believe it is. And then the other one was Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech's defense was problematic, to say the least, a year ago. So when 9 of your, 45% of your touchdowns through the air are coming in 2 games because you can't move the ball at all in that way in any game outside of those, for the most part, that's kind of, I mean, that's not Clemson. That's not what we've gotten used to. And so, yeah, they might be on track to give away more than one surprising loss down the stretch this year. And you're right. It's probably just going to be a 1-bid league.
Yeah. And to me, this Clemson team, like, yeah, it's quarterback, it's wide receivers. We've had questions for a couple years now. And to me, it's kind of all led to this where I kind of out on Clemson. Maybe I'm overreacting, but that's where I'm at. I don't know how this is a real stat line, Travis, but somehow Ted McMillan is still running 10 receptions, 304 yards and 4 touchdowns. He just put up a season in week 1. Absolutely stellar performance. Talk about taking down a slate. I don't actually know. I didn't play this last weekend because I couldn't get my shit together. So I don't know if Tet was on a slate, but if he was, he took it down.
Oh my gosh, dude. I mean, it was one of the most efficient performances ever. I think it was, can't remember the stat now, but to average, I mean, he averaged over 30 yards per reception. Like, there's been more receptions in a game. There's been more yards in a game. There's been more touchdowns in a game. But to do what he did and to be as efficient and as explosive, as unstoppable as he was, I know one of the long touchdowns, he was just wide open. It was busted coverage. But outside of that, I mean, he just looked unstoppable. And he hadn't even been 100% throughout camp and even like this spring some. And to come out and just show out and ball out and be every bit the stud that we thought he was and more, it was just really fun because it makes me get really excited for what this next year's class is going to look like at wide receiver. Like I'm expecting more for now, and so he was already kind of like him and Luther Burden were kind of already in a league of their own. The gap looks even wider, and he's probably atop the list of all wide receivers. It looks like a lock to be top 10 draft capital type dude next year.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to imagine a world where he isn't. Do you think? I mean, obviously 300 yards a game is not sustainable.
No.
What is? Like, do you think it's kind of like he's gonna probably hit 100 a game, most games, every game?
I would say that that's probably the expectation, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, given this hot start, it's going to be hard for him not to just like, if he stays healthy, just like, oh, okay, 1,500 yards, like, and that's not common. Like generally, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys in that kind of range, and that's it. So we're going to see a power conference wide receiver probably be one of the most productive, if not the most productive wide receiver in the country by multiple measures, not just raw volume, but key like per all like rate stat measures in terms of yards per route run, in terms of his receiving yard market share, his yards per team pass attempt, things that we nerds care about, and measures that he was already, when you put him together, like a 98th percentile producer a year ago. He's just going to cruise to a 99th plus percentile profile. And then unless he tests absolutely terrible, which is obviously not going to happen,
right?
He's going to be one of the best wide receiver prospects from a data perspective and film perspective, probably, unless you overemphasize the catch point play to his game. He's going to be one of the best prospects we've seen in the last decade. So he's not generational because that gets overused, but he's very freaking good, and that's fun.
Yeah. Who do you to remind you of? What's like a comp that you have for him?
Oh man, maybe like
he gives me like Mike Evans vibes at times.
Yeah,
big frame.
Yeah,
but
like and Mike Evans, his quarterback situation, even you could draw back to, because Johnny Manziel was just that short dude that just extended the plays, that works some magic. And Noah Fifita is not Johnny Manziel. He's not Johnny Football, but he does kind of extend some plays and just YOLO ball it, and not he doesn't do a lot of the the quote unquote like what counts as a big time throw.
Sure.
But oftentimes he will just make something happen, and Tet just is super smart and finds this spot for him. So
yeah,
that improvisation, especially in the college version of Mike Evans, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I remember I always felt like Mike Evans didn't get enough credit for making Johnny Football, because he was a big reason why he was so successful. Anyway,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely was. Especially in retrospect, like looking back.
yeah, for sure. One of them is the Hall of Famer, and the other is not.
No.
Hey, so this one's not so fun for me to talk about. The Oregon Ducks, they were in a bit of a fight. I have here the Oregon Ducks yet to take flight, 24-14 win versus Idaho. But then I pulled up the stats because it's absolutely insane. Like, they had almost 500 yards of offense, 380 of it passing. But then you do look at that big number on the bottom, their yards per play. Like 5.6 is still pretty decent. But you look at Dylan Gabriel's stat line, 41 for 49. Like, when you're throwing the ball 50 times, lots of dinking and dunking, not a whole lot of vertical stuff. I think Cade McNamara was responsible for more air yards than one Dylan Gabriel. So that's interesting. But how concerned are you with Oregon? We've all heard about how they've got a lot of injuries on the offensive line at the moment, but those guys are expected back. But they do have a big game against Boise coming up. Do you think the Ducks should be worried, or do you think this was just one of those, hey, let's not get too much on film, let's just get this W and then survive in advance?
I think it was more of that, and one of the touchdowns came on what was it, a trick play for Idaho,
right?
Like, and there's a whole strategy, and their pace of play. It was just like let's hold on to the ball as much as we can. They only had like 40 something total plays on the game, which in college you're typically looking at on one side having like 70 plays a game. And, because Oregon actually controlled the game, it didn't look like they did, but because they kind of did control the game, they had like almost 90 plays, just so you don't realize that it was kind of stretched out by Idaho, and they're just strategically, hey, let's just play in the game or stay in the game, play this nasty, dumb version of football, and don't ever bend, like force everything into like funnel underneath, just tackle, and maybe we'll scrape something out. And if you play this game like 100 times, 1,000 times, this is probably as close as it would be.
Yeah.
And so like 10 points is not what you want to see, but that's probably that's like the 99th percentile outcome for the Vandals. And so disappointing, and you want to see more explosiveness, and you want to see Gabriel actually be more confident. But I was breaking this down with our Oregon beat writer for A to Z Sports, and we were like, what was going on? Like, what was the build, the approach? And it was just strange. Like, even when they were in 11 personnel and they have guys like Evan Stewart and guys like Tez Johnson, they just were not pushing it. Like even in, they had, I think it was 33 pass attempts in 11 personnel and averaged whatever it was per pass attempt. It was just like way, way, way below standard for even like Gabriel's normal production. So it was just like a putt offense. So it's just really strange that they chose to do that. And it was almost like they were just trying some things out though. Because like early on in the game, they went kind of heavier in personnel. Like they went with some 13 personnel in there. They went with a lot more 12 personnel than I thought. And part of that is because they actually have some decent tight ends. Like, I mean, I know you're really high on Terrence Ferguson, who had like 7 catches for almost 90 yards himself. Like that's great. And I'm actually really high on Kenyon Sadiq, who actually I believe is from Idaho. So this is kind of like a little bit of a game there, like beating his buddies. Some of the guys who weren't good enough to make Oregon's team were probably guys he was dunking on in high school. So they have good talent there. I mean, even behind him, and they have Patrick Herbert there. But it was just strange. It just felt like they were trying something out and just putt. Let's just not give anything away. Let's just take our singles. All we got to do is show up, and we're gonna win. And that was almost not good enough somehow for a team that should be top 5 in the nation.
Right. And at no point was I nervous that Oregon was going to lose. But also at no point in this offseason have I been like, yeah, for sure Oregon should be a top 5 team. Again, I'm always skeptical on my teams, so take that with a grain of salt. But this was a bit, it wasn't concerning in the sense that it changed my mind about anything, but it just showed that like my concerns that I have for this team are legit. And that a lot of that stems around the depth and the length of Big Ten play, like having to travel that much to that many big schools, play a bunch of primetime games, like that adds up, wear and tear on your body. And so maybe this is a blessing in disguise, get some of these young guys some reps early on in the season. Who knows? Yeah.
And I just wouldn't overthink of it. I just really think they were trying not to show anything and just execute, getting some kind of rhythm, and not just they played that too much, So, So props to Idaho for coming in with a decent strategy and actually almost seeing that do something down the stretch. So
almost. I'm super excited because we're almost at kickoff day for like Saturday's coming up, and we've got one of the biggest games it's been a very short season, but this is one of the biggest games. This is one that a lot of us have had highlighted for a while here. We've got Texas traveling to the Big House, Texas at Michigan. The spread is Texas. It's -7.5 at the moment. The total is at 43. Michigan money line is at right about +225. But just kind of want to talk about, this is a huge game. And we haven't seen, I was going to say hyperbole. Both these teams are, coming off absolutely fantastic seasons. And someone's getting an early L this year. And my money is just to ride it with the favorite. I kind of think Texas takes care of business. I lean Texas plus the point. Like, whatever the spread, give it to me. 10 points feels fine. I just don't believe in Michigan that much this year. Am I overlooking a really nasty defense and what possibly could be a solid offensive line that can run the football and take care of business? Or do you think that, given what we just saw with Fresno State, Michigan could struggle a little bit here, and maybe Texas is a rather comfortable favorite here?
I think it's dead on that they should be a rather comfortable favorite here. I think that I've got major questions about Michigan's offensive line. I've got major questions about the offense as a whole. I actually wrote them up a little bit this weekend, just breaking down how awful their offense was. And yes, it was Fresno State, and yes, you could argue that they weren't trying to give away much as well. Like kind of same with Oregon, and they didn't have to because Will Johnson had a pick six, and Zeke Berry, their new kind of slot hybrid, had an interception as well, and so they just kind of like ran away with it, and they were fine. But at the same time, like they just couldn't move the ball outside of a couple explosive runs from Quillel Mullings, not Donovan Edwards, and some decent reception work out of Colston Loveland. They had nothing at all on offense. Like Davis Warren, the former walk-on with a really cool story, he's not even like a power conference starting quarterback. Like basically at this point, like something has to happen. He has to get a lot better. They have to have more weapons than just Colston Loveland and 2 carries out of 15 for Quillel Mullings doing anything to show up. They need Donovan Edwards to actually show up. They need to commit to Alex Orji actually at quarterback, not Davis Warren, because Alex Orji is actually a fun dual threat. He was in for some of the game. He had 2 pass attempts and a touchdown, had 5 carries for like over 30 yards. And they just need to give him the ball. Like, even if he's not a perfect passer, he can execute and be a bigger problem to account for opposing defenses. And if they don't do that, they don't just immediately give the reins over to Alex Orji and shift and find somebody to step up against Texas. Ideally, that's Tyler Morris, their wide receiver. And the Michigan offensive line gets way better. Like immediately, they're going to get absolutely freaking crushed by Texas by a lot. And it will not be close for a moment because Michigan has the worst offense through week 1 in the entire Big Ten. Not Northwestern, not Iowa, not anybody else, not Rutgers. It's Michigan. And that's a problem.
Yeah, and it's funny because, I mean, I wouldn't have known this if we hadn't talked about Oregon, Idaho earlier, but Idaho averaged 4.6 yards per play, which I know is just one stat of many. But Michigan was at 4.4.
Yeah.
So even Idaho against Oregon was more successful on a play-by-play basis, which is wild.
That ranks 122nd, by the way, in FBS in terms of yards per play. 122nd, Michigan. So that's especially frustrating given they just came off of like, hey, a first-round quarterback, a day 2 running back, all these talented players everywhere, and now they can't even move the football. They really need a major bounce back to come out of nowhere. Otherwise, it's just going to be a really frustrating season for the defending national champions. So
does Fresno State have anything that we're like, oh, okay, maybe it's because this one matchup, their D tackle is huge, and I obviously did not watch much of the Fresno State Michigan game. I was on Fresno State and I was on the under, and somehow, both hit.
Yeah. No, they're not good. They, like many G5 teams, they kind of got picked apart. And so they don't really have anybody to get excited about through multiple picks. And they don't have, I guess, Malik Sherrod, the running back, he's decent, but for like college fantasy purposes, not really like NFL projection.
Sure. But it's not like Fresno State's got some awesome defensive front seven that really was able to just slow down Michigan. Like Texas is going to be able to do a lot more pushing around, I would imagine. So let's talk about Texas a little bit, because it sounds like you're real down on Michigan, especially offensively, and rightfully so. Texas looked really good in stretches. I mean, Arch Manning had a nice little performance himself. I think he went like 5 for 6 and threw a touchdown. So you got to love that. But Quinn Ewers, of course, looked good. Running the ball, I was interested to see who got some run outside of Jaden Blue, and it looks like they found a guy.
Yeah, Jarrett Gibson was actually for a while the running back 1 in his recruiting class, and so I'm not surprised. The IMG Academy product is actually stepping up, and it's probably going to be a real deal, kind of like 1B with Jaden Blue. And so I would like to see Jaden Blue just carry And I think he's going to be the feature in closer games for sure. But it's great to see Trey Wisner come in and get a touchdown, and he was kind of a legit recruit himself, and Jarrett Gibson to look explosive and fun. So they've got really a trio of running backs that they can really rely on, despite the injury to Christian Clark and CJ Baxter, both in the backfield. So the skill talent looks really good in the backfield. Both quarterbacks look like it doesn't matter which one starts; they're going to win a lot of games. And then just to see some really fun wide touchdown with Isaiah Bond, where he burned the guy so bad he had time to adjust his face mask. And so,
yes,
he literally, the guy pulled his helmet off at the line of scrimmage, and he went inside left. I mean, like, you realize how bad you have to beat somebody. You start off your route running inside on your stem, and you stack them so hard, like within not even 10 yards of the line, you run like corner pylon, and you're just wide open. Like, it's hard to describe. If you didn't see the play, Isaiah Bond is just it looked like a first round wide receiver kind of play. So really excited to see what he brings. Matthew Golden had a couple scores. The second one wasn't as impressive as the first, but like it was just kind of like a short route. But he looks like he's kind of their second option. But they're just really deep all across the board. We kind of talked about this on other shows, but with Silas Bolden on the little pitch play from Manning for the touchdown, and Ryan Wingo, the true freshman, actually having more yards than anyone. Incredible. So they just have so many guys that they can trust on offense. Really tough to stop. And then when you got guys on defense like Anthony Hill Jr. at linebacker, who might be the best linebacker in the entire sport as a true sophomore, and you got a handful of edge rushers that you can trust. And it was good to see Colin Simmons get some snaps. They're true freshman, like fringe 5-star kind of player off the edge, because they needed somebody to kind of step up there as well to give them depth, and they got it. So like every layer of the defense, they just don't have many questions. Even the younger guys, like Malik Muhammad and Derek Williams Jr., like they're just stepping up and looking good, looking like some of the best in the country.
So we're smashing Texas -7.5. It sounds like, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I'd be fine all the way up to like almost 2 touchdowns. That a model wouldn't tell you that much because of like historicals, like recent stuff. You would, at this point, you're still baking in some of the pedigree, some of like recent success with a lot of the models, but that's not properly adjusting for how bad Michigan probably is at this point.
Yeah, and also how good Texas is. And you mentioned depth. Like, yeah, at running back, they're starting to get a little thin, but at wide receiver, they're really like they're really deep. At quarterback, they're deep. Like they can do a lot. Something I liked seeing too was the involvement that the running backs had in the passing game as well. It was nice to see that they didn't give that up, because last year we saw a lot of that too. So I just think it's a real tough matchup for Michigan, especially this early in the year. They haven't really settled in on, I mean, I know what they want their offensive identity to be, but to your point, with Orji not in there, I think it makes them much less dynamic running the football. So to me, I think Texas is going to be able to load up that box and try to see if you can beat them on the corners, and I don't think they'll be able to. So to me, I think, yeah, Texas is going to be one of my favorite plays this weekend.
Right there with you, man. This should be a big marquee game that is winnable for Michigan, and it's just not going to be.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm not on the over is because I could see Michigan not doing their part. Like I could see them really struggling to score.
Just not scoring. Even.
Like I could. People are going to hate this. Clip this and send it to me. 31-7 is a very likely outcome.
That's definitely in the cards. It really is. Like that's gonna look foolish after this, but
yeah, 31-7. I'm gonna bet the exact score and retire and be happy. Man.
Yeah.
So good, yeah, okay. No, that's good to know. All right, I'm excited. We have a brand new segment. It's nothing too creative and wild. We are going to do a week 1 temperature check. All right, Travis. So this next slide is going to have a ton of schools on it. And the only thing I want you to do, I want you to pick a couple of schools that you're excited to talk about and we're doing a temperature check based on like your whatever power rating you have. I know you have one either on a spreadsheet or in your mind, and who's moved the most up or down. So the ones that you're like, man, let's just say I expected Tennessee to roll. They rolled, no change. You don't really have to talk about that. Vandy, man, they maybe really outperformed. Virginia Tech maybe outperformed. So on this slide here, we've got a bunch of teams, everyone from Texas A&M and Florida. We've got Notre Dame and USC. You can go off screen too if you want to. But what are some teams that, have really moved, like your perception of them has moved the most after just, well, in some cases, it might be 2 weeks, given week 0 and an 0-2 Florida State team.
I mean, it has to be Florida State, given, DJU looks like he, again, has the yips. And I think there's just this national narrative that has to be weighing him down at this point.
Yeah.
So he's just like done mentally. And so I don't know how much longer he's even going to be the starter there, which is hard to see again, because he's been so good at times and then just so unbelievably just horribly bad. And so I think that they're kind of hard nope at this point. Like they're just out of it. They're done. Like I saw that some people were trying to write up like, hey, this is how Florida State still makes the playoff. No. Like they could go undefeated all the rest of the way. And you look back at these 2 weeks and go, no, that's definitely not a playoff team.
Right.
And, so like if they went out and win the conference championship because other people lost on the way there, cool. They have a mathematical possibility, but not really. So true probability is that, I don't know, there's always something there, but they're done. So that's disappointing. Virginia Tech, you and I both talked about the opportunities that they had at hand. And Karen Drones and the whole team looked completely inept for like over 2 quarters against Vanderbilt. And that was ridiculously disappointing. However, they began slowly creeping back. It was like my 4th screen throughout the day, by the way. So I was still watching it. I just wasn't priority. Virginia Tech had to get things together, and they had to win in overtime, and they couldn't pull it off. And so their season, they're going to be clawing, scraping, and whatever. I'm not saying that they are, they've dropped off crazy, but they're definitely ice cold right now. And if they do that again against anybody else on the schedule, they're going to lose. Like Vandy, I love that they had a better start than we thought, but there was a reason their win total was at 2.5 on the year. So I guess that's going to cruise to the over now. But Virginia Tech, holy cow, like just so disappointing.
Yeah. Who are a couple teams that you're really excited about that maybe outperformed what you expected? I did have Purdue and Auburn after some big blowouts, some big big out.
Thank you, Boilermakers. There we go.
Huge offensive production. A team I want to hear your thoughts on just real quick, because they're probably the team that moved the most in an upward trajectory for me, and that was the Penn State Nittany Lions. I had them not making the playoff, and if I had to redo that right now, I would rather have picked them to make the playoff, because Drew Willar, not only does he look competent, but with Andy Kotelinki there, I cannot say his last name, the offense looks a lot more exciting too. So to me, Penn State was a big move up.
I think the trio that you have on screen here, for those listening on podcast, definitely check us out on YouTube. But the 3 that you have here that stand out to me most are USC, Penn State, and Miami. Yeah. Because, they actually played, in many cases, teams that actually are, exist, like have other decent human being athletes on the other side of the field. Unlike, Purdue, it's cool. Like they played like Indiana State, which, man, Sycamores. Sorry, Larry Bird. Disappointing. But it's just, holy cow. You're going to take care of business against that kind of team. But Penn State taking care of business with West Virginia, at West Virginia, and USC at a neutral location, holding on, and with 8 seconds to go, pulling ahead, your dude Woody Marks for the touchdown, taking care of business against LSU, who apparently just loves losing in week 1. And Brian Kelly, of course, loves to whine, as he did in postgame, angrily, I might add. And then Miami, we already talked about them, just taking, just dismantling Florida. We thought that Miami was going to win, but to win in the style in which they did was pretty crazy. So I think those three stand out to me the most. Drew Aller looking decent. To have actually, they had like 20 first half points. Like that's really freaking good for them, I guess. And Nick Singleton to break off a couple plays that he did, especially the one play I saw he actually hit almost 22 miles an hour. So he was actually, I believe, the fastest ball carrier recorded this week in all of college football, I'm pretty sure. So hey, by the way, I'm still the exact same upside level prospect that I was before. To see him do that in week one was like, okay, cool. Singleton's still that dude. So I think Penn State, their offense looked more fun and more explosive. And
the defense is still nasty, man.
Yeah, very freaking good. To hold them to 12 is just really, given the offensive line there for West Virginia, like they just handled the whole freaking game. And so that's a big win. Penn State, we were waffling back and forth with whether they're going to be in the playoff last week. I'm confidently expecting them to make the playoff now.
Yeah, I'd like to rescind my no and switch it around because I agree. Well, that was a temperature check. We'll do that from here and there, especially when we see some big swings. But I want to talk about Kansas State with you, Travis. Kansas State is a team that we have, talked a little bit about here and there. Big news, of course, their starting quarterback now, Avery Johnson. He took over the role, sending Howard packing to Ohio State, of all places. Avery Johnson, he didn't have a tremendous game, but he was fine. This team, like our kind of our projections on them, like would be like, kind of focusing on that running attack. And it certainly seems like what they're going to be doing. What's your take on Kansas State kind of season long before we jump into this next matchup versus Tulane?
I think, Avery Johnson just didn't have to do anything. Like they had, I think, 3 different quarterbacks do something throughout the game. And he's going to be a really fun dual threat problem. He didn't have like a 50-yard score, but he had one that was almost for 20 yards, I believe. And I know I hate to just keep on hating on teams that are, what is it? I think it's Ohio Valley Conference, I'm pretty sure, in the FCS level. But UT Martin is not real talented. So winning 41-6 doesn't really mean much. So we didn't get a huge takeaway there. But it was cool to see Jace Brown, who I believe is a true sophomore, a wide receiver, actually have like 5 catches for like 70+ yards. I was kind of concerned, with the departure of Ben Sinnott, now in the NFL, like who steps up for them at skill positions. Like Trey Spivey's got some size to him. Jace Brown looks like he could be a young breakout wide receiver. That's cool. And so it looks like they've got a couple options that they can trust on that side of the ball through the air to go with Avery Johnson's crazy mobility. And then they got just unreal just talent and explosivity out of DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards at running back. So they have a lot of skill talent that's really fun to kind of believe in. And then they don't have a bunch of NFL players on the back end of their defense, or like they don't have a Felix. Oh my gosh, what's his name? The Chiefs pick from last year. And Zudike? No, I'm gonna say that wrong. But I can't remember how his
defense, man.
I can't remember how to say his name off the top of my head. He was really good. They don't have that kind of player, but they still have good enough talent that seems to be playing well together. And so I'm still expecting them to be right in the mix down the stretch in the Big 12 championship game. And
and if I recall, when we did our Big 12 championship, like just our win totals kind of preview and whatnot, K-State was your team to win the whole thing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I think that's still very much in the cards. So I think that is very real. That could definitely happen. So no, I wouldn't say that's changed. And so I think a lot of people are going to just, it's an FCS opponent, whatever. And but there's just a lot of things that they kind of check boxes in a good way for me this week, even though it was against a weaker opponent. So
and
they just have a lot of weapons.
They do have a lot of weapons, and I think they have a pretty fun schedule too to kind of ramp up. They are going to be in some exciting games just from an offensive production standpoint. Like we're going to get to see K-State play Arizona with Ted McMillan. We're going to get to see them play Colorado with Travis Hunter. So it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be some big shootout games, but they play against Tulane this week. Kansas State is only a 10-point favorite. The total is 48.5. Tulane to win as the underdog would be a plus 260 on the money line. To me, this seems pretty short. I'm real tempted to go play Kansas State, but you know me, Travis, I love picking the favorites all the time. So that's pretty much where I tend to lean. But do you think this is a pretty decent matchup for K-State to kind of just go in, execute a game plan, get out with a pretty easy, comfortable win? And maybe the reason it wouldn't cover would be like a backdoor something or other? Or do you think Tulane could actually put up a fight here and stay in this thing for 4 quarters?
I think Tulane, this has real clunker potential where they, again, Avery Johnson doesn't necessarily put up bonkers numbers passing because Tulane's defense is actually decent. And Tulane has a couple running backs that can help them play kind of game control at some point throughout, at least the first half, like in Mekhi Hughes and Shady Clayton Johnson. They've got some real fun talents at running back. And I'm really glad that Shady is finally, for those of you who don't remember who he is, maybe you guys know him as Ashad Clayton, but he was a decent recruit when he came in. But Shady Clayton Johnson, as he goes by now, didn't have to do much, but he's super explosive and he's like the running back 2 for them. He brings some more punch to Mekhi Hughes' like burst and speed. So they've just got a really fun tandem there that's going to be tough to stop. And for those of you who forgot, Mario Williams, the guy who started at Oklahoma with Caleb Williams, transferred to USC with Caleb Williams, but actually somewhat disappointed last year, not blowing us out of the water with a bunch of production, now is in Tulane. He actually had 100 plus. Yeah, he actually had 100 plus receiving yards this past week actually as well. So to see him be the clear runaway wide receiver 1 and be playing all chips all in this year, trying to push for an NFL shot, man, they've got some guys that are going to be tough to stop. So I think I probably would say that this is more like an underdog play in terms of like the line situation.
Sure.
Because I don't like guaranteeing that Kansas State's going to cover way more than a touchdown against Tulane. It could be that it is exactly 2 touchdowns. It could be that it's exactly 10 points. But there are a lot of outcomes here where Tulane gets one more bounce, and because of their really fun skill talent, they just find a way to keep it close.
But you're not flirting with that plus 260 on the money line for Tulane.
No, because I believe in Kansas State too much to do that. But I think that plus 10, I think that could push. But a lot of outcomes around that push mark.
One of the things I liked a lot for Kansas State was the fact that they were able to run, I think they averaged 9.1 yards per carry. Again, UT Martin. Something that impressed me for Tulane. Again, they were playing Southeast Louisiana, not a great team. Pitched a shutout. They only gave up 200 total yards of offense. So that's impressive when you can keep anybody to minimal yardage of offense is always a good thing. I'm excited for this K-State team. I don't think they actually end up winning the Big 12, but I do have a future bet on them making to the final game. So I think K-State is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to see how that running back room with Avery Johnson, it's going to be really fun to see just how dynamic they can be and how creative they get with that run game too.
Absolutely. So they're still my pick to win the Big 12, and I think they should be way more people's pick as well.
Yeah. I'm excited to get into some more NFL prospects. We jumped into some of this last week, and I like how you have this set up, Travis. We're going to kind of tackle kind of game by game from a player perspective. So first, we're going to talk about the Tennessee Volunteers, Nico Iamalaiaba, as well as his wide receivers, because I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that. Tennessee just came off a game where they put up 718 total yards of offense. I don't care who you're playing. That's a lot of yards. It requires a willingness to continue to push as well, which I respect. But Nico went for 314 of those yards with 3 touchdowns and looked really, really good in the process. So really excited about him as an NFL draft prospect. To me, he's kind of the wide receiver. He's the quarterback one of the class, isn't he?
Let's see. I probably. I mean, it's funny, like when all these analysts are like, "Oh yeah, I'm calling it now. Nico's going to be the next so and so. Nico's going to be a first round pick." Like, guys, like he was a 5-star, and not only is a 5-star, like he was a slam dunk kind of expectations. Like he was like the $8 million man. You know, like he was one of the biggest NIL leaks or contracts that we kind of heard of because his arm talent was unreal. So all these guys like jumping on the bandwagon now, or even heading into last week's game, heading into the season, it's like, guys, yeah, he should be in the conversation to like win the Heisman at some point this year. Like that's not crazy to project. And so, yes, he should be in the first round discussion for 2026. And that might seem a little bit premature, but he, just basically destroyed single-handedly Iowa's defense last year and already looks the part this year and could take Tennessee to really special places. I know they have a decent tough schedule at some point. Like they play Alabama and Georgia this year. But if they're in both of those games in his first year as a starter, even if they don't win those games, and he does statistically well, he's going to be like the hype man. Like, oh my gosh, he's coming back again. He's going to be the pick, the projection for first overall if he just does okay in those two games.
Yeah, I'm totally there. What I would like to hear before we jump over to the NC State side of this game, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these wide receivers at Tennessee, because you know me, I've been a huge Brew McCoy fan like forever. Because Brew McCoy's been around for a while. They've got Squirrel White, they've got Brazel, I forget how you say his name. Dante Thornton is there, Oregon transfer. I mean, a lot of guys. How do you see these guys? Again, we're looking at NFL draft prospects. How do you see these guys from an NFL talent perspective? Who do you think should be drafted first from that group? And who do you think will be drafted first from that group of wide receivers? It may not be the same class, obviously, with all of them, but just kind of who do you think has the highest upside?
Highest upside, man. 2 or 3 years ago, I think Dante Thornton would have been the guy. He's really struggled to stay healthy. You know, he was with Oregon before, and struggled there as well. But now that he is finally healthy, this past week he had two really impressive touchdowns on top of 100 plus yards, and that was fun. But he wasn't like the lead target necessarily. He might have that fun deep threat energy to him and profile, but I'm not sure he ever puts it all together for an entire season. I know that I get to see a lot of the off-season grades for like a couple of the services that do, pre-work for a bunch of the NFL scouting departments. They give grades for these players a year in advance, right? And so Brew McCoy was actually, a day 2 kind of prospect for most of the kind of pre-work charting services, despite his kind of, up and down past himself. And so I think a lot of people believe he should be their earliest pick. But I think the fastest wide receiver, the guy who creates the most space, the guy that fixes inaccurate deep balls from Joe Milton last year and impressed at times quite a bit despite the lackluster play around him. Squirrel White is that guy, or Marquarius Wright, as it might be in your favorite college fantasy app of choice. But Squirrel White only had a couple catches this last week, but I think once it comes to creating separation against the toughest opponents, he's going to be kind of more of a go-to target there, and it's going to emerge as the best profile of the bunch. So I like him a lot.
Brew McCoy is half a foot and 50 yards, 50 pounds or 60 pounds heavier than Squirrel White.
And so that makes people think, oh, he's got the higher upside, but can he actually separate in the way that we're in the Squirrel game?
It's just, I was just looking at their height and weight, and I was like, that is insane. 5'10",
same position.
Yeah, you gotta love it. Another person playing that position on the other side of the football who just had a game is KC Kevin Concepcion. He went 9 receptions for 121 and 3 touchdowns in what was actually a pretty surprisingly tough game for the Wolfpack. I'm all over Tennessee, by the way, in this one. I think the line is -8. Give me Tennessee. I'll play an alt line all the way up to 2 scores. That's not what we're talking about right now, though, Travis. We're talking about NFL draft prospects. And Concepcion is only a sophomore. So we get to enjoy his production on the field for at least one more year in college football, which is very exciting. he looks to be the real deal here. What's the upside for Concepcion? Again, true sophomore.
I think that anytime that a 3-star kind of flashes, he wasn't like a super high upside recruit coming in. He was a high 3-star, maybe fringe 4-star kind of talent, but back in. So going in, undrafted expectations. And so like when somebody like that with that profile starts producing, there's some questions, It's like, okay, but is it just all opportunity? Is it just because the pieces around him are bad? And the answer might be still that the pieces around him aren't crazy good. But actually, if you look at Justin Jolly, the tight end who transferred in from UConn, he's one of the best tight ends in the country, actually, for college level purposes. I'm not sure how well he projects as a pro, but he's a really good tight end. Noah Rogers actually was a fringe 5-star talent as a recruit from North Carolina, but he chose to go and be like the 3rd or 4th wide receiver recruit to Ohio State. Realized that was a bad idea and transferred immediately. And now it looks like they're wide receiver 2. So the talent around him is actually even better. And I think that's actually a good thing because that opens up more opportunities for him to be in one-on-one situations. Even when the team knows that he's the favorite guy, there were times where he was actually just facing one-on-one coverage, like in man. Like they're like, okay, go beat us. And he did a lot. And even if they're like trying to jam him and frankly hold him 15 yards downfield, which is one of the scores on like a deep over route or deep cross or whatever, they definitely were holding him, but he still broke free, played physical, fought back, and dove for the touchdown. That's just like he's putting it all together. He's got the route running, he's got the physicality, he's got the proven production profile at an early age. So to me, floor level at this point is early round 3 for Capital, and he could be much higher by the time it's all said and done.
I love that. I mean, what a jump. And he even was making headlines because I knew about him as a true freshman before the season started. So that means he's doing something right as a 3-star. But yeah, absolutely on the right path. Projections just keep going up and up for him.
Yeah, and NC State's, I know we wanted to bash him before. All right, let's just have questions. As I look closer at their lineup, I'm like, okay, they're embracing the transfer portal way more than I thought, especially on offense. I'm like, they're actually trying to build this and get up to snuff. Like so many transfers from Justin Jolly to Noah Rogers, Wesley Grimes, who was from Wake Forest, Dakari Collins, even like who had a catch or two from Clemson. Like they're really trying to piece together with high pedigree guys. Grayson McCall, even their quarterback's transfer, he looks decent. And so don't worry. Western Carolina was again just trying to play the game script game and play. I think they had barely 40 plays themselves, just trying to like stretch things out and keep it close.
Right. And I think NC State could be fun, and Concepcion is a huge reason why. I want to talk to you about a game like we're talking about Tennessee versus NC State, where we could see a lot of exciting wide receiver play. Let's talk about a game where at least one team is going to rely solely on their running back, and that's Boise State. Ashton Gentie just went off, like absolutely went off, and they play against Oregon. It'll be interesting to see what Oregon can do to stop Ashton, because Ashton went for 267 and 6 touchdowns. He only had 4 receiving yards on 4 catches, but still, if that's a PPR league, that's 4.4 points. No, he went nuts, absolutely crazy. And he faces off against Oregon, and we've got Jordan James, who we've talked a little bit. I think he made the back end of our top 10 running backs earlier this year. So someone I want to hear your thoughts on again after watching the first week. But first, let's sit and talk about Ashton Gentie, because as a prospect, I mean, again, another guy that we've talked about before, but he put together a quarter of a season in one game. Like seriously, 267 yards and 4 touchdowns or 6 touchdowns. It's insane.
Yeah, you talked about how insane that Ted McMillan stat line was.
Right.
And with 300 receiving yards, having almost 300 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, averaging more than 10 yards per carry is absolutely wild against anybody that you play. And he did it. It wasn't an FCS team. It was Georgia Southern. And they're not like an elite power conference team. That's not who they are. But to do that against them, that's just nuts. And I know we had him like as our running back 5 or whatever it was on our top running backs episode. That might be low.
Yeah.
So I mean, he looks every bit the freaking part, man. And the offensive line there, a few of those runs, he it's cliche, but you could have driven a car through a couple of those holes that his offensive line opened up for him. So that's a really fun unit. They make it easy for him, and he's talented. So Oregon's going to have their work cut out for them.
Absolutely.
I would not be surprised if he's the most productive player out of anyone in the game.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the other side of the football, because we do have Jordan James. He did not have near the game. I mean, he had a touchdown. He had 40 yards receiving, and he ended up going for 95 on the ground with 15 carries, which, given how Oregon struggled running the ball at times, I was actually surprised at the end of the game to see it look as decent as it did. But they're going to need a lot more from him throughout the season, and I think he can. Maybe not a lot more. They need this on this needs to be like the floor. This has to be like, just go out and give me at least this every game in order for Oregon to kind of meet their expectations. But Jordan James continues to show that he is capable at absolutely every element of the game that you need a running back to contribute in.
Yeah, and you say we wish it would be even more of an impressive game. He had 135 yards from scrimmage.
I know.
That's like
against Idaho, though. You know.
Yeah, but 19 touches. It was efficient, and they were trying to play the keep away game. That is, Idaho was, and so for him to do that and have like a top 40 productive performance in the entire country across all teams, that's still not disappointing necessarily. So he's clearly going to have a significant role. When they go into power packages, I will say Noah Whittington was actually surprisingly the guy that they went with when they had like 13 personnel. So that was a little odd because, that I think of it being like a power package. And so you want to be like more short yardage, but he's like 5'8", 200. James is bigger. So I don't know if that's just a small sample and that's going to change, but James just looked every bit the part. So I don't have any problems just still projecting, running back 10, maybe even higher for him in the NFL next year even. So again, he's just been that guy that stuck around with Dan Lanning when he came over initially, and now he's going to be rewarded with a huge opportunity. And so have to believe that he is at least a mid-round prospect at this point.
Yeah, I hope so for his sake. He certainly has all the talent. All right, one more duo we want to get to, one more game we want to cover, and that is Dylan Riola, Shedeur Sanders. Nebraska hosts Colorado. Both quarterbacks had pretty solid games. I mean, Shedeur put up 445 passing yards with 4 touchdowns and interception. Riola was pretty efficient, 19 of 27 for 238 and 2. There were a few of those throws, though, from Shedeur that looked like if it was the NFL, man, his head would be rolling in the backfield and a safety would be coming up with the ball. There's one play in particular where he got hit right as he threw it, and I believe it was Jimmy Horn was able to come up underneath it still because he's got wheels. That doesn't happen at the next level. But then again, we pick on Shedeur Sanders maybe a lot more than most. Let's talk about these 2 draft picks, Travis, or prospects. They're not picks yet. And again, very different timelines. Shedeur Sanders likely going to the draft this season. Dylan Riola, a true freshman. So age is a part as far as eligibility goes, but both look to have really solid careers.
This is not going to be, we've talked about this before, this is not going to be last year's game. Nebraska's just better in most positions that matter. It was really good to see Dante Dowdle at running back actually get more work, and they look like they have like a decent trio of options there at running back with Ramir Johnson and of course Gabe Irvin Jr. still being in the mix. And it looks like Isaiah Nair finally found his spot. Like he was, the super productive guy for Wyoming, transferred to Texas, hoping that would work out. He was injured, transfers to Nebraska. Now he looks like the go-to guy. Like him as a transfer, Jamal Banks coming over from Wake Forest. That duo right there looks really, really fun. And they have some other super athletic guys as well that really just didn't see a bunch of action this week. And so, man, I really like Riola and his chances in the surrounding cast, and starting right away and being as good as he was. He had one play in particular that he basically had a no-look passing play. And it's like, oh, man, that's just way more advanced than he should be. I don't care that it's UTEP, that you should not be able to do that and look that good. And so, yes, Shedeur was able to barely beat North Dakota State, and he was efficient. But still, I mean, there were multiple plays where I'm like, the only reason that guy didn't sack you right now is because he's a future accountant, not because you did anything. You just outran some dude that was okay on his high school team, in North Dakota State took him in. But this is not. And then this is not like even like a normally level, like a normal good level of North Dakota State. Like they have a different coaching staff, they have different levels of players. Like the team in FCS now is South Dakota State, and so it's not the era of North Dakota State being, this dominant FCS force. They're still going to be good, but like they're not what they were even just a couple of years ago. And if they were, they would have beaten Colorado.
Right.
So. But it's the coverages that they were running. It was just insane. I don't know if you watched the whole game. I was just like, what are we freaking doing? There's like 15 yards of separation where Shador is just tossing the ball just freely, just like I'm just gonna, even under pressure. It's like, oh, good, he stayed in the pocket. Oh, there's 20 yards of space. I'm just gonna chuck it up there because he's wide open by 15 yards, and that was frequent. I remember seeing like the first big deep crosser from LeJonte Wester and thinking there wasn't even a defender on screen hardly, and it's 20 yards downfield. And I'm pretty sure they were in cover 3. Like it was like, what are we doing? It's like, I don't know how that is even possible. And Travis Hunter obviously fixes a lot too, because he's like the best player in all of football.
He's very good. Oh my God.
So that's going to fix some things. But I think Nebraska is going to win the game. And we're going to be coming away from this game thinking, oh, Dylan Riola is better than Shedeur Sanders. And people are going to be surprised by that, and they shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think the line is 7 right now, and I'm on Nebraska for that one as well. But I will not bet my hard-earned money on Nebraska. That's disgusting. I would never do that.
That's fair.
I definitely
who lives
would,
in Colorado.
Yeah,
that shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, we covered a lot of players, a lot of teams. We really got into it, Travis. That was a lot of fun. Is there anything that you feel obligated to talk about before we wrap it up?
Well, we did I might be biased, but A to Z Sports.com launched all 11 of our major college football team sites. And we've been really just all over the sport. I mean, a couple of our most popular pieces this last week were on like South Carolina and Colorado, and just brands that aren't even teams that we're really leaning into heavily this year. But we're trying to do our best to cover the sport nationally in our first year of expanded college football coverage. So just really excited about the team. Just really proud of all the guys and girls that have been putting in tough hours at times to just make sure that you guys have all the content that you need on the college football side. So really, really excited to be building that team at A to Z Sports. So just check out A to Z Sports.com and all the stuff that's being written up there. It's just fantastic content.
Yeah, because you could never actually have enough college football content. There's always more, and we don't have enough time to talk about all of it. So definitely check out A to Z Sports for, definitely all your college football stuff, but they also, of course, y'all are NFL place to be as well. So good stuff there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in for another episode of Total College Football. I can't believe that we're already a week in 0.5. What do we count week 0 for? It was 1.5 weeks into the season. And so week 2 is here, but enjoy some more college football. We will be back with another set of segments this week with some takeaways, some draft prospects, and more here on Total College Football. You can find me at FF_Travis M on Twitter. That's Travis May. You can find Stefan at Stefan Lako. That's Stefan Lako. But you guys enjoy college football. We'll be back with more total college football here soon.